In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how we can build UVs for our model here. So UVs, once these are set up, you can actually start to paint textures on this model here. But it is a process that you have to take your 3D model and lay out the UVs in a way that you can actually paint on this. So what are UVs? Let me pull this image over and we can kind of take something that everybody kind of knows. So everybody's worn a t-shirt before and everybody is kind of familiar with t-shirts, then their seams that they have on there and how it fits onto your three-dimensional body, right? The concept is still the same for these three-dimensional objects here. You can see in the t-shirt design that there's a pattern to where basically if this cloth is laid out flat, you can take a flat object and you sew it together in a particular way, and then it becomes a three-dimensional object that can be fitted on something. So we've got the same thing going on here with our 3D model, where we need to actually lay this out in a way to where it can be flat. So we can take it in a painting program like Photoshop and we can paint on that thing. Now there are 3D paint programs, but you're still going to need UVs currently for putting paint on your 3D model. So we're going to open up the UV texture editor window, so we can go to Windows and then go to UV texture editor and open that up. And you can see I've got some UVs on here already. I just did a planar map from the top. So let's look at the planar map real quick. We're going to go under the polygon menu set and we're going to go to create UVs. We're going to do planar mapping and then go to the option box and then go ahead and load this up. So you can see with the planar mapping we get this projection from, and we've got these different axes that we can use. We can do X, we can do Y, and we can do Z. So I want to project like a plane going straight down onto this thing. So that's the Y axis, which you can see with this little manipulator here. So I'm going to hit apply like this, and it's going to give me this new tool that you can see directly in here. So I'm going to move around, and if I click on this little icon here, I can actually move this thing up, which nothing's going to change in the mapping over here. Now if I move it left and right, you can see that it's going to push this thing left and right, and it can push it up and down like that. I'm going to hit undo, and it's basically like think of this as a camera, and we're looking through this camera, right? And as I move this camera to the right, it's going to push it this way. If I move it to the left, it's going to kind of push it this way here, like that. Now I did a planar mapping just going straight up and down, but you can click this outer ring, click that, and you can rotate it, and you can see what it kind of does at that point. Again, just think of this thing as like a camera that's pushing straight through the object, and it can see the top and the bottom and just kind of keep pushing that view all the way through like that. Okay, so usually if I do some UV stuff, this is in the window, you can see this area, this is the 0 to 1 range in here. This is where your UVs are actually going to live. So after you do some kind of operation and until I get everything packed in this space, I might push it off to the side and just leave it over there for now. So that's at least to get us something going for our UVs and get something started. Now we can do UVs on just particular faces or things like that. So we could right click over our model and say face like this and then select this. We can do the grow selection, which is shift, and then the arrow key, which is really tied to the period key on the keyboard, and that'll grow that selection out. So you can see I'm just looking at these faces now, and we can do another projection. We're going to go create UVs and do a planar map. I already know the options for that, so I don't really need to open it up again. So I'll just go and say create planar mapping, and then let's just push this off to the side here like that. I'm going to do the same thing for this bottom piece, so I'm going to select one of the faces and just hit shift and that arrow key to the right, which is the period key on the keyboard right next to the question mark, and you can repeat last command if you want. So I already know that I want to do this create UVs planar mapping. We've already used that tool, so I'll just tap G and it'll do it again for me. So I can push this thing off to the side like that. We've got our Canon thing. Let's look at another new tool in here. So let's right click on here and say UV, and we can just select one of the UVs and whatever is a shell, so you can see that this is a model and it's not joined together with this piece here and it's not joined with this piece. We can put it on this tool right here, and this is the move UV shell tool. When I do that, all I need is to pick one UV and it auto selects it for me. So I can click that and separate that out. I can click this and separate these pieces out, and I can click and drag and separate this one out. So now everything's kind of busted apart. The other thing I need to do is maybe turn on this little display here that lets me know if things are facing the correct way. So every face on here has a normal direction, and that's whatever this face is facing the camera, it would have a normal kind of sticking out of here. And really the only thing you really need to know about the normals is that it determines on how this thing is going to shade in the computer. So there's a direction for every piece of the surface. So this top part, I want this to be facing out, and this bottom part, I want this to be facing out as well. There's display options, we can turn that on and off, but really all you need to know is if I turn this thing here, it's going to let me know if things are facing the correct direction with the UV texture editor. Now if it's purple, it means that we've got some overlapping UVs. So I want to separate these things out. I want to separate the top from the bottom here. So I'll select my edges. I can hit F10, or I can right click on here and say edge. And let's double click on this, and it should select a good part of it, and I'll just hold down shift and add an edge here like this. And then remember that whole t-shirt diagram that we saw here, right here, this thing, we've got these different cut marks where the cloth has actually been cut. We're going to use those same kind of concepts inside the computer, so we're going to cut, and we're going to cut the UVs right here like that. Now you won't notice anything different until we can turn on the texture borders, so it'll make it nice and thick so we can see where anything's been cut on there. That's going to come in handy. Let's put it back on this tool here that we had for moving the shells, and now I can just right click in here and say UV. I'll just select one UV on this thing, and I can get this separated out. So now you can see I've got a color of blue, and that's facing the right direction. This red is not, because we did a planar projection going straight down the object like this, right? So that planar projection picked up the top part, it also picked up the bottom, but it did it to where the surface is reversed. So all we have to do to fix that, we just select this thing here, and we can just do flip vertically or horizontally. So let's just flip it here like this. Now what I would probably do is if I came to the bottom of this and I was looking at it with my camera, this should probably make some sense for what I'm looking at in the world. So I can use this to rotate around like this, and if I looked from the top, we've got this kind of going on here like that. So everything feels about right for this. The only other thing that you're probably not going to know, until you get a little more experience working with UVs, is that there's tension on these corners that I need to kind of release. And so I'm going to select these edges right here, and I'm going to cut those edges. Now if I zoom in really close here, I can't even really see it because this thing's nice and flat here. But if I right click and say UV and select a UV on here, let me get it off this tool here. I'll just put it on the pointer tool. So we're just selecting one individual UV, and then tap W for move. You can see I can start to move this stuff and get this separated out. Now it's kind of a tangled up mess, but here's where we're at with this. This is the end of this, and then we've got this piece here. Let me select this and get a little bit closer here so we can see what's going on with this this edge. So this is this UV here, this is the top part of it right here like this, and this portion here, they still join together. Now there is a tool that we can use to get this thing kind of laid out. So I'm going to select all this right and through here, and I'm going to use this tool right here like this. This is the unfold selected UVs tool. I'll just click it, and you can see that it tries to kind of arrange everything and then flatten it out, and I'm just going to rotate this thing back to being straight. Alright, now that we have that done, let's go ahead and move forward, and let's go ahead and split apart some of these other pieces here. So you can see this flat piece that we've got here. We need to get this separated from a top and bottom. So I'm just selecting the edges on there just like what we looked at. So I'm holding down Shift and adding to that selection of edges. Then I can just go ahead and use this cut tool here, like this. And I'll go ahead and cut the corners as well while I'm working on this here, this piece. Just like this. This will relieve the tension that we have whenever we go and move this thing. So I'm going to put it back on that tool, just click a piece of it. You can see this is red. We already looked at this. Let's just go ahead and flip this horizontally like that. And then we'll use that tool that we looked at before for unfolding the thing. Let's go ahead and put on the scale tool and get this close to about the same size as it was before. And you can see what it did. It relaxed the corners that we have here like this. Now if you want to see how this is kind of playing out, you can actually turn on this little icon here. Will actually show a temporary checkered pattern. The goal is to get this checkered pattern to be as close to evenly spaced squares as possible. Now you can see on this piece here, the squares are a lot smaller than these squares here. That means that's going to be more pixels that are going to show up on this particular area than this one. And the reason for that is because this piece here, which is the bottom, has been scaled down. So if we scale that up like this, you can see how many more pixels we'll get on that thing. But you know, none of this really matters too much until we get everything laid out into that 0 to 1 space, and there'll be some more rearranging of pieces at that point. So again, if you just want to turn that on and off, you can check the texture, kind of if it's stretching and things like that. So see how there's some stretching on this. We haven't really dealt with these pieces yet, but it's at least something for you to kind of take into consideration and be thinking about. So I'm going to turn that back off. So we got that piece separated out like that. I'm going to go ahead and select the edges along through here. So I'm going to split this off here like this, and I need to get to the bottom of it. If I'm having trouble seeing, I can tap 4 to go into wireframe view. That might help you to be able to see through the object and maybe pick certain edges. Maybe not in some cases, so it all kind of depends. So if I want to go back to shading, just tap 5 on the keyboard like that. I'm going to keep selecting these edges all the way around on this piece like this. I'm going to cut those, and if I did everything right, I should be able to grab this piece and kind of pull it off like that, and then grab this piece and then pull it off. You see I'm just basically separating those different elements that we have here. So the next thing I can do, right click on here, I'll just go face. I'll select these faces that we have here. I need to take it off this tool. This is one thing that I get hung up on this tool a lot. So I just have to hit Q, which is the pointer tool, and that'll release it out of whatever that mode is for that. So again, I'll right click on there and go to face, and now I can select the faces. It's just kind of a pain. We've already looked at the create UVs, the planar mapping, and the option box for this. Last time we did a projection from Y. This time we need to do a projection going this direction, which is the X-axis. So I'll just go project from X-axis like this and hit apply, and you can see that I can take these pieces here and move it. I'm going to use this tool again, just going to click on this and move it. This one's red, so it's facing the wrong direction. So we can flip horizontal for that, and we've got that kind of straightened out. So we can just leave that there. The other thing I'm going to do, I hit F8 to go into object mode. I want to get all the flat planes of this. So like, we're going to use a cylindrical mapping type for these cylinders, these cylinder shapes, but we have flat areas of those cylinders that we need to kind of work with as well. So we'll continue to use the planar projection method, and this one I'm just going to hit F9. That's going to be my verts, or you can right click on here and say vertex. And if I select this vert here, and if I hold down shift and add to my selection like this, there's a way to convert this selection of a vert into faces. So I'll just hold down control and hit F11, and that will convert that one vert into a selection of faces. And the reason why it selected all these faces is because all these faces actually share the same vert here. So when we convert that selection type, it does that for us. So it still should be in face selection mode. So I'm holding down Shift and then adding to this selection. And if I grab something too much, I can just hold down Shift and then deselect it. Now, one thing that comes in handy, if you tap 4, you can see through the model and see any areas that I shouldn't have selected. So if I want to deselect anything, I hold down Control and then drag a marquee, and that deselects. So again, that's hold down Control and drag, and that'll deselect like that. And I don't want to get that one. So I'll tap 5 again, and then let's just work our way around the model. Hopefully this time I'll be a little bit more careful about selecting, like this. And let's tap 4, and it looks like I've got everything that I want out of that piece. So again, I'm going to do the create UVs, I'm going to do the planar mapping. This time I want to do it from the x-axis again. And so let's go ahead and do that. That'll put this here, like this. And then I want to put it back on this tool, and I can move this out. Let's select this piece again on that tool. I'm going to move that out. This is going in the wrong direction, so we're going to fix that. So we'll just go ahead and put these here like this. So I can grab both these and then just flip like that, and we're good now for this piece. So we're getting pretty close. Let's do the same thing for this Canon piece here. So I can hit F9, which is my verts, or I right click on here and say vertex. I'll just select this one. And again, to change that selection type into faces, just hold on Control and do F11, and then I'll grow that out like that. And so I think I'm going to right click on here and say face, make sure I'm selecting faces. I'm just trying to pick out every area that I think should be flat. I'm going to grow this selection out. I'm going to hit Shift and then that right arrow key, which is the same key that's being shared with the period key, just to grow that out like that. And I think I'm going to need stuff like this. So here's something else that you can do with selection. So I can maybe select a face here and I want to keep growing it along here. I can hold down Shift and double click to this face and it will keep growing around for me. So that can kind of speed up selection. Sometimes it gets a little confused as to what you want it to do. So if you just kind of work in chunks like this, should work okay for you. So I'm going to grab that, and I think I'll leave it there for that. Okay, this time with the planar projection, I want to do a projection from Z. So I'm going to go Z and hit apply. And then we've got the front of this thing here. We're going to move these pieces apart, trying to basically get to the point where I want to separate these out so I can figure out which pieces are facing the wrong direction, which I've got this here. So I can just flip that horizontally and that takes care of that piece. Now what I'm left with is this whole thing that we've got here, which I guess if I was going to do a planar projection, because I'm just a little worried about this hole that we've got here causing some issues. So I can double click these edges that we've got here and hold down Shift and double click it again to keep growing that loop that we've got, and then I'll split that off, and then I can take the UVs on this and move this thing out, and it kind of separates this thing out. I'm just a little bit worried about doing a cylindrical map on this, and you'll see why in a minute. I'd rather take this and then use this tool and kind of let the computer figure out the spacing of everything. If I grow this up a little bit, you can kind of see what it's going to do for that. I think that will work fairly decent. Now I can just select all the faces on this thing. Let's right click and say face, and I'll select all these things. Again, if you can't do that, it's probably stuck on this tool here. And we're going to close down the planar mapping. Now we're going to try a cylindrical map. Okay, so we're going to go create UVs and do cylindrical mapping and do the option box. We can just take a look at the options for it. So I'll hit apply, and as soon as I do that, it's going to give me this manipulator, and it's going to do this weird kind of projection for me. The tools on this is I want to turn this into a full cylinder. Just like the planar mapping tool, there is this little icon that you click on here, and it'll open up translation, scale, and rotation. So I need to take this manipulator, and I'm going to click on the outer ring to put it in rotate mode, and I'm going to rotate this thing this way until it is a true cylinder. Now if I look at my channels box over here, you can see as I rotate this thing, it updates these values. So I need it to be a true rotation of -90 degrees, so we can just put that in there. And then the other thing is you can see how it's kind of really stretching this thing out. If I put the textured indicator on there, you can see how stretched it is. So we can click on the scale manipulator and then scale this out to make sure that all these little squares are actually as square as they can possibly be. So you'll just have to kind of fiddle with it a little bit, and I'll put it back on the rotation tool. The other thing that we can kind of look at is this split line. So the cylindrical mapping always seems to have some kind of slight issue. If you rotate this thing around, it kind of updates the split point. So I want this being split on the bottom right here like this, and so you can see if I rotate this quite a bit, it sits there and readjusts that split line. But if I kind of just move it enough, you can see I can get it to be on this bottom edge that we're looking at here. Now it's going to do some funky stuff with this thing here, so I'm going to select these edges. This will be the first time that we're really kind of looking at this sewing edges together. So you see that because we've got this turned on here, we can see the texture borders, and it's nice and thick here. And this weird thing that happened with the cylindrical mapping, which always seems to happen with this mapping type, you can see if I grab those points and pull them around, this is what's going on with it. So I could manually try to fix this. That's a possibility. Or I can just come through here, I'll hit 10, select this edge, and then I'll go ahead and use the sew function. So here's the cut, and then we've got sew UVs. So this will sew this edge together here, and then I've got this edge that I still want to sew together, and then I might have to come back and then just fix this one little UV in through here. So again, if you want to look at the texture on this and what's going to happen to a texture, you can see that in through here. So we can move this thing. The end of this is not really the best method of kind of doing this thing for the UVs. It'll work, but what would probably be better is if I took this and probably split this off. I'll just double click on this edge loop right here, and I'll cut that, and then I'll just select the faces for it like this, right? And so just keep this in mind, all this stretching that's going on, and it's because we've got this kind of dome of a a sphere or whatever. If we go and we use the planar mapping again, but this time we're going to go the Z-axis. We're going to push a planar mapping down the Z. We'll hit apply for that, and then now take a look at what it looks like. It is stretching a bit through here. We've got to flip it. So let's go ahead and take these UVs. We'll go ahead and flip it like that. And then we can use this unfold or relax part, and I'll just scale it back up after doing that. Now look how nice and fairly even this is. It's not going to be perfect, but it's way better than what it was before whenever we left it the way that we had it before. Okay, so we're getting really close to being done here. We've got some faces that are left over on this cylinder piece, so let's use the cylindrical mapping again. So we're going to go create UVs, do the cylindrical mapping. We're going to go and drag this all the way out, just like we did last time. Use this manipulator right here. And again, I'm going to have to take this and we're going to rotate it to be the right direction for the cylinder. So I've got this going on here, and we need to rotate this way as well. Let's look at the channel box for this. So if we do this, let's just make these whole numbers here. Like this will be rotate 90, and this will be negative 90, like this. This is the direction that we really need this thing to be. So I never know exactly what those numbers are supposed to be, so that's why I try to rotate it into place the best that I can, and then I figure out what those numbers need to be over here in the channel box to make them the absolute values that I'm looking for. Okay, so let's just move this off to the side and look at the spacing of that. Remember, we gotta kind of scale that out to make these look more like uniform squares. So we're close on that. And then we've got this funky split line here that we need to fix. So I'm going to put it on the outer ring for the rotate, and let's put this on 4 so maybe we can see this a little better, like that. And I might want it on this edge loop here. I know it's probably going to be hard for you guys to see this edge right here, so I need to rotate it down one more, right down there. That's where I want it. Okay, I'll tap 5 for that, turn the texture thing off like this, and so we've got this piece here, and that's all working. The only thing we've got to do now is we've got these pieces here, these like wing structure things. So I should probably take, this is a really flat surface. This should be split off from this, and I should just leave it a flat surface. And we're going to do that with planar mapping. Let's do that. Let's cut these, and that separates them from this piece here. Now let's move these out of the way like this, and if I take it off this tool and go here, we should be able to select the faces for that. Right click and just say face, and we'll grab these faces, and we're going to do a planar projection from this side. So we're going to do create UVs, planar mapping, and we'll do the x-axis like this, and apply, and then we can move this off to the side. If we use this tool, we can drag this thing out, and we've got to get this separated out so we can flip this one just like that. And now what we're left with are these this top part of this wing thing, whatever, this flap thing that we've got here, and I'm going to separate that off. Like that. I'll cut that. Let's do it on the other side as well. Right here. So we'll cut that, and I think that looks pretty good. Let's drag this thing back out. So we select it. So there's that wing structure that we're trying to get separated like this, and I can flip these, and let's use this tool here to kind of get it to be the right shape. Now it does make these a lot smaller, but I can move them kind of closer together, and then we'll just scale them up. I'll tap R and get that middle manipulator, and I'll try to make sure that they are about the same size, like that. Now if we take a look at what we've got left over, we've got some tension on our corners that we've got here. Let me tap Q to get out of that tool. That thing always trips me up. So we've got this here, and this corner here. If we split that, and we do the same thing on this side, we'll split this, and this thing here, like that. And it looks like we're good except for this piece here. Let's go ahead and split that. Now we can use the unfold tool on both of these. Just going to move them together real quick and then hit this tool. And let's see what it generates for us. These different shapes that we've got going on here. And I know it's going to look kind of funky with these edges that are coming off here like this. And if I want them to be pretty close to the same size, I can flip this. I know this is turning it red, and it usually means it's a bad thing, but we can try to get this roughly about the same size. Might not be perfect, and we can flip it that way after we're done. Okay. All right, so here's all the UVs. Now we need to rearrange everything and put it into this 0 to 1 space. That's a possibility for us. So I was going to show you this tool real quick that we can select everything, and we can go to polygons, and we can go to let's see, layout, and go to the option box for this, and we're going to just reset the settings and just see what this gives us for this thing. So I'm going to take a look at this. I'm going to turn on these texture pattern and take a look and see if all these squares are somewhat a similar size. And that works pretty good. But I'm going to set this prescale. I think I had it on to world. So if I do that, I think it's going to lay out things in a way that it gives us everything is trying to be roughly the right scale as far as these squares. Whenever you see the pixels being laid out on this, it tries to do a nice even job for you. Okay, so that's one way of getting everything in there. You could just leave it exactly the way it is if you wanted. The other thing I like to do is, if this is a model, and let me just save real quick, and just Control S. You should probably be saving incrementally, but just want to make sure from this point on. I can actually take this thing. If I know this model is symmetrical, I can take one half of it after the UVs are set up, and I can delete one half the model. Now I do have to have a split going down directly down the middle of this thing, so I can go to this piece. This piece does not have a split, so I can go Control on this edge, right click and say to edge ring utilities, and to edge ring and split, and it should put it right down the middle for me for that. So I think that was the only piece that I needed to make sure had a split going down it. And then now I can just tap 4 and kind of roughly look down center of this, and then grab all the faces on one side. And I think I'm good on that. If you wanted to check this, you could hit spacebar, go to the front view, and take a look. I'll tap 4 and make sure I've got nothing but this side selected. So I'll delete half of it like that. And at that point, what you can do is, we take this thing and we can move it kind of off to the side here like that. And if we take another version of this, we'll take it and we'll duplicate it, and we'll give it a negative scale and X like this. We can select it, and we'll delete the history on it, Alt-Shift-D, make sure there's no history, and we can go to Modify Freeze Transformations. You can see now we've got our UVs on this, and all of our UVs are red because they're facing the wrong direction on this other copy that we've got. So I can just go to right click, say UVs, I'll select them all, and I'll flip everything, and I'll push this off to the side. Now what we have are two versions of this thing. We've got a left and a right. The UVs are exactly the same, but if I want to join them together, I need to actually join the objects together. So I'm going to save real quick again. So I'm going to go to Mesh, and I'll do Combine, and we'll combine those objects together. Let's delete the history on it because you can see all this garbage we've got on here. I'm going to hit Alt-Shift-D, or I can go to Edit, Delete by Type, History, right in through here. And we also need to join these objects together. So if I hit F9, or I right click over here and say my vertices, I can just select all my verts. And if I let's see, if I shift right click, we can go to merge vertices right up here. So again, shift right click over it, say merge vertices. We're going to do the merge vertices option box right here, and we'll open that up and we'll make this threshold really, really small. So we'll do something like 0.0001 right there. And what that means is it's going to look for a very, very small distance, and if these verts are basically sitting right on top of each other, it'll merge them together. So make sure you don't have that thing checked. Otherwise it'll just try to merge two vertices together. But that will allow you just to do a big marquee over this, and if everything's sitting on top of each other, you can hit apply like this, and you can see that it will merge it together. Now you can check this. You can see there's a line running down this. This is our normals need to be smooth for this. So we can go to normals up here and say soften edge like that. And if that edge goes soft, then you know that you've done the work that you need to do. The other thing we can do to check things is we can go to display polygons, custom polygon display at the bottom down here. And we're going to turn on border edges, not texture borders. That's what we're currently looking at. So if I turn on border edges, and if I see any really chunky lines in my model, that means something didn't get merged together. And so I'm looking here, and it looks like everything did get merged together, so we're good. Now if I turn that back on texture borders, you can see we can see our texture borders. So just know the difference between your border edges and your texture borders. So we'll go ahead and close that down. And now we will be in the mode of taking these pieces and sewing them together. So there are some tools. I'm going to try this thing real quick. I'm going to select the edges, let's say like down the middle of this thing, like this. And there is a move and sew edges. So if I do that, you can see it joins the other piece together for me, and I can take this, click this, and move it off to the side. If I do the same thing for like this piece here, I'll have to tap Q to get out of that move tool. So I go to edge, and then we'll go here, we'll do the move and sew edges like that. Just going to select this and move it out of the way. So it would be a matter of continuing out this process, and when you're done, you could reuse the layout UVs tool, right? And that could rearrange everything for you. Or if you want to be really, really picky, you can move all the pieces by hand and make sure everything fits within this 0 to 1 range. You want to give a little bit of breather room and a little bit of space for pixels in between things, so you might want to give just a little bit more space for this. The goal is to pack this area as tightly as you can and get as much out of the texture as you possibly can, because think about any open area is just pixels that won't have any texture on your model. So anywhere where you see these pieces, those are the pixels that are going to be on there for making your texture. So I'm going to pause the video, and when I come back, I'm going to try to have this thing wrapped up and show you what the final layout looks like. Okay, here's the final UV layout that I was able to make. And again, it was just sewing all the pieces together and then trying to rearrange them the best that I could on the page to maximize the space that I've got here in the 0 to 1 area. One thing that I did do is, you can see on these pieces that we had here, these things were actually joined together here, these kind of end pieces that were hanging off. And I split them off because it was causing a situation where I had to use a lot of empty space just to get these things to fit within here. So I split that off, and I was able to kind of move this thing here and here. And I know I do have some empty space up and through this area, but I was trying to keep everything as uniform as possible. So if I turn on this texture approximation thing here, we can see that most of the squares are about the same size in spacing, and we're going to get a nice even distribution as far as our pixels go on our model. So again, this is the final layout for this. Now there are some other UV tools within here. There's the automatic mapping, which if you're in a really tight bind and just need to get something on there really quick, these aren't the best. I can just throw that on there real quick, but you can see what it's going to do for you. It basically makes these 6 different planar projections and tries to split everything apart for you. So again, if you're a real tight bind, you can use that. The other thing that isn't within here is a spherical mapping. So we didn't have anything that was necessarily totally spherical. You could think of the end of the cannon here that was actually made from a sphere. If you had something that was more like a sphere, you could obviously use spherical mapping. Usually works best for any kind of sphere that's got holes at the top and the bottom of it. And for the most part, I usually don't use that one too much. It's only kind of a special case. So with these few tools that I've shown you, you can get most of the UV work done. Now there are a lot of different tools within this tool set that you could actually play around with, but as far as just getting it in there and doing your first UVs and getting a decent layout, all the tools that I showed you should help you get the job done.